friends, and welcome back to another Before You Read lecture. This is our final lecture, final Before You Read lecture in our investigation of friendship in the Bible. I know I'm sad as well for this time to come to an end, but I think it's been a really fun and fruitful journey as we've moved our way through the Bible, through various parts of the Bible, and asked the question, what does the Bible say or teach us about friendship? And we've been in the Old Testament, we've been in the New Testament, and for this final week, we will be returning to the New Testament. We'll continue our sort of narrative approach to this question of friendship in the Bible. We'll be focusing on where friendships are at or presented in the book of Acts. So I want to do a couple of things with this lecture. First, I want to give you an overview of our reading assignment for the week. Then I want to ask the question about friendship in Acts and whether or not it's a fruitful question for that part of the Bible. And then third and finally, I want to give us a sense of some pointers, some frameworks for thinking about this question of friendship in the Bible, or friendship in this portion of Acts. So that's the plan, and as always, I look forward to hearing from you with any of your thoughts and questions about this topic. To begin with, I'm going to ask you to read Acts chapters 8 through chapters 20. So 12 or 13 chapters, a longer section than some of our assignments, but hopefully one that is well worth reading. I consider this portion of Acts, chapter 8 through 20, to be something of the middle third of Acts. If we think about chapters 1 through 7 as really focusing in on the Jerusalem church and the apostles and disciples there, then chapters 8 through 20 would focus especially on Paul, his co-workers, and the question of Gentile inclusion. And then chapters 21 through 28 are something of the end of Acts and focus mostly on Paul on trial and Paul's arrests in the final chapters of Acts. Now, of course, there's some fluidity with this threefold division, and I'm sure that there are debates about whether or not that's an effective way to treat it. But for our purposes, it gives us a nice chunk of Acts to read and to think about together. So, is it helpful at all to think about the narrative of Acts through the framework of friendship? I have to admit that on the surface of the book of Acts, it suggests that maybe it's not a super fruitful investigation. There aren't a frequent mention of friends or friendship in the book of Acts. We couldn't say that it's a major theme. And some of the times that we see friends in translation, especially in the NRSV translation, that's actually a translation of the Greek word for either men or for brothers. And this is an attempt on the translation committee for the NRSV to lead towards gender inclusion in the translation practice. There is mention of Cornelius's friends who come out to meet Peter in Acts chapter 10. You'll hear about that as you read this week. But it's not a major theme, I have to admit that. I would add one detail, which is the early pictures of Acts, the church in Acts, Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, does narrate one of the convictions of friendship in antiquity, which is that friends have things in common. And so when you see the disciples and the early church creating this collection and giving of their private possessions to the good of the group, this is an example. This is a step in the direction of friendship. Ancient readers would have understood and would have seen what was happening probably as, oh, this is a trope on friendship, that the disciples are creating this place, this space where all things are held in common. That might be another way of saying they're creating a company or a group of friends. And so that's maybe the foundation for our investigation of friendship in this portion of Acts. So once again, I'm encouraging us to think through this from a narrative perspective, considering the way in which the story itself, the way the story is told, the way that characters are portrayed, the ways that characters interact with one another, and the things that characters do and say, all of those elements and more, how they might help us think through the question of friendship in the book of Acts. Now, I want to give you a three-part framework, if you can. Follow me on this, for reading Acts and the narrative of Acts from the perspective or for the perspective of friendship. The first is a text that we read early in our study of friendship in the Bible, and that's John 15. Remember that John 15 says that friendship, or that greater love has no one than this, that one would lay down one's life for his or her friends. So friendship, according to John 15, has this self-sacrificing quality. There's a loss of life, perhaps a loss of privilege, perhaps a loss of power, for the benefit of one identified as a friend. And so where do you see that kind of friendship in this portion of Acts? That's framework number one. Framework number two will also be familiar. This comes from Aristotle. And Aristotle, remember, had these three types of friendships. Friendships based on utility, friendships based on pleasure, and friendships based on the good or the character of the friend. And so where do you see the sort of ideal friendship in Acts 8 through 20? Where are there relationships that are deepened and nurtured because of this commitment to the good? Another thing that Aristotle talks about is that the friend is another self. And so where do you see friends or relationships in Acts in which that sort of self-replication, for lack of a better word, is present? Finally, a third part of the framework for our purposes comes from another ancient philosopher named Cicero. We haven't talked about Cicero really in this up to this point. But he says that friends, and his sort of discussion of friendship is much more involved than what I'm giving you here, but he says that friends have a complete agreement in their aims, in their ambitions, and their attitudes. So once again, thinking through how are characters portrayed in this part of Acts, we might be asking the question, where do we see agreement in aims, in ambitions, and in attitudes? So that's the three-part framework. John 15, Aristotle, and Cicero. Keep those sort of things in mind as you read chapters 8 through 20 in the book of Acts. And again, the major question before us is, how might we understand Luke's portrait of the early church as a community of friends? And what difference would it make if we do that, right? What difference would it make? If you're looking for particular moments to focus on, you might pay attention to Peter and Cornelius in chapters 9 and 10. You might look at Paul and Barnabas throughout this middle section. You might think about Paul in Ephesus in chapters 19 through 20. The Jerusalem Council in chapter 15 is maybe another place where you could think about friendship being on display. And a final sort of, I don't know where this one fits, but a final moment or thing to consider is the role of the Holy Spirit, right? What is the Holy Spirit doing? How is the Holy Spirit working in this part of Acts, and how might that relate to friendship? Finally, to return to our traditional, normal questions once again, when we are reading about Acts, as you're reading Acts and thinking about it, ask this question: what is friendship like, or what are friends like in the book of Acts? 2, what is friendship for, or what is the purpose of friendship or the purpose of a friend? And then 3, how, if at all, does God relate to friendship, is our third question. And again, as always, would love for you to take just a few moments after thinking through these questions and reading this part of Acts to complete this sentence. According to Acts, friendship is blank. And see what happens in that reading. All right, there are so many ways we could read Acts, so many things that we could focus on. I hope and pray that our focus on friendship will be rewarding, and I so much look forward to hearing from you and your thoughts. For now, happy reading.